Story 1. My old workplace had a control freak bean counter. At one point, she decided that any purchase of equipment must come with documentation showing that we had searched around the internet, proving we got the best deal. It was unenforceable, so our supervisor told us to ignore it and that he would deal with the backlash. One day, I had to buy some tools for the workshop and came across some coolers on sale. We needed coolers to transport stuff, so I bought one. I brought it back. We measured it and found it was the perfect size for what we had planned. That time, the bean counter was watching us. She walked into my supervisor's office with a printout from Amazon and the boss in tow, saying she had found a similar cooler for less. My supervisor looked at the printout. So you found a cooler that is $2 cheaper? Yes. How much time did you spend looking this up? Just 1 hour of work. And you think Rum should have spent 1 hour of his workday shopping for coolers? Yes. You do realize we pay Rum $17 an hour? We need 3 coolers. Right now he grabbed those coolers while out on a supply run. And you would rather have him spend 1 hour of his day at $17 an hour to save $6? He pulled a broken vice grip from under his desk. This is the cheapo brand vice grip you approved. This is fine for regular at-home needs, but we are a workshop and need quality tools. We have been using a Good Stuff brand vice for 3 years. Cheapo lasted 6 months. Do the math. Story 2. I was working as a medical assistant at a private practice medical clinic. Our clinic manager would not allow the new receptionist to drive to the bank to deposit cash. The manager made her walk, carrying the money bag, so she could not drive away with the money. It was bizarre and went on for a few weeks. Then the receptionist was mugged and more than $1,000 in cash was stolen. She was allowed to drive after that. Story 3. My boss started adding a note to the roster requiring all staff to start 15 minutes earlier than indicated. I started keeping track of my unpaid overtime and received 3 days of paid leave. That is no longer required. Story 4. This is about an old roommate who was a senior developer at a small company. It was an open secret that one of the other senior developers, a man who had been there since the beginning, would sometimes spend time looking at plastic surgery photos, including before and after shots and images of active procedures. He did it often. People teased him about it, but he was not embarrassed and it harmed no one. One day, a project manager mentioned this man's ongoing interest in plastic surgery to the chief executive officer, and the chief executive officer reacted angrily. He declared that, going forward, no one could use work computers to access external websites at all. Anyone who has been a developer knows that much of the job is searching for technical information online, so the policy nearly halted productivity. It lasted only a day before the chief executive officer rescinded the rule, but he informed everyone that their browser history would be monitored from then on. After that, most employees did not change their behavior. They began remotely accessing their home computers to browse instead. Story 5. I worked at a company that had mandatory 1-hour lunch breaks. Since we ate on the premises, our actual lunch was often about 15 minutes. We tried negotiating shorter lunch breaks so we could leave earlier and beat traffic. The next day, an email arrived from the owner stating the fixed work and break hours for the whole team. They were to be followed with no exceptions. The following week, a big client called about halfway through our lunch and nobody moved. The phone rang until the owner took the call, spoke with them, and immediately came to scold us. Sorry, boss. As per your rules, we are off until 1 p.m. No exceptions. A couple of weeks later, we did some on-site work for the same client. They were, to be honest, one of the best clients I ever had. They took us out to lunch, and while talking, we relayed the owner's rule. They had a good laugh and, while the project lasted, made a point of always calling during our lunch break just to annoy the owner. Story 6. Back in the early 2000s, my high school implemented a policy requiring students to wear their identification tag at all times. If you did not have it on, you were sent home. Many students reported losing their tag so they could grab food or skip class. We were the only graduating class that wore identification tags for all 4 years. The policy ended soon after. Story 7. I worked for a consulting company, traveling Monday to Thursday around my country. We had a generous hotel allowance, enough for 5-star hotels, and a rule. If you stayed with a friend, you received an allowance of about 1/3 of the hotel allowance to buy gifts for the host. I got the rare treat of a 6-month project in the town where my best friend from childhood was attending university. We made a great arrangement. I would crash at his place and spend the evenings drinking beer, watching movies, and playing video games. In return, I used the gift allowance to order dinner for the two of us. After submitting my first expense report, a human resources representative told me that the gift allowance was supposed to be used rarely and not for personal meals. So I booked a room in a 5-star hotel, was upgraded to a junior suite because of my reward status, and invited my friend to evenings of beer, video games, and room service. After my second expense report, the project manager asked about the tripling of expenses compared with the first report. After I explained the situation and pointed out what that sum of money would mean over the 6 months, he contacted human resources. 2 days later, the rule was rescinded. The project even gave my friend the then newly released PlayStation 3 as a thank you for letting me stay with him. Story 8. Not a stupid rule. I think this should apply. I had worked in aviation maintenance for 12 years and wanted to leave my employer. During my interview at the new company, I was asked why I was thinking of leaving a good, reputable company. I said new management prioritized efficiency over the one thing aviation maintenance is all about: safety. The interviewer liked my answer and assured me their company did not cut corners on safety versus cost. I got the job. About 6 months later, as the new guy, I got the short end and had to work on Christmas Eve. It should have been a short day. The boss's plane was coming in from Cabo to drop off chartered passengers, refuel, and take him and his family to their vacation home in Aspen. When the plane arrived, during my post-flight walk-around, I found a serious problem and grounded the aircraft. The boss was clearly unhappy and attempted to force me to make an unapproved repair. I refused and was sent home. I didn't quit. It was documented, and I got to go home earlier than planned on a holiday. Someone else was called in to make a minor repair. The plane taxied out with the owner and family, fully fueled, and attempted to take off. The repair failed. A large component broke off and entered the jet engine inlet, destroying that engine. The plane's brakes overheated trying to stop the heavy plane with only one engine. Some fuselage was damaged by the failing engine, and the plane finally came to a stop. The Federal Aviation Administration investigated. Who made that repair? Who approved the flight? The technician who attempted the improper repair had his license revoked. The boss, who owned the charter company, was heavily fined and placed on probation with continuous Federal Aviation Administration audits. The insurance company denied the engine claim on the basis of negligence, costing him millions. They could not fire me. I was able to tell the story repeatedly with a big smile on my face. Story 9. I worked at Starbucks for more than 5 years, before and during my undergraduate studies. At one point, our district manager implemented a policy called Just Say Yes, which prohibited staff from telling customers no. It lasted about 3 months, and during that time, unaccounted for product and waste increased by more than 300% because when the point-of-sale system did not have a way to enter a customer request, we had to do it anyway. We also received complaints from neighboring districts because their customers arrived angry, having been told that we had accommodated requests at our store that violated local food service codes. I knew how the policy would play out and laughed as management panicked over the resulting problems. Story 10. My spouse's workplace realized it did not have a policy about sending sexual images or jokes as part of its email acceptable use policy, so it added one. However, it made sending or receiving sexual content a firing offense. The intent was to stop people from subscribing to such content. It also stated that access would be immediately revoked until a determination was made. Someone who had been fired for an unrelated reason sent a graphically sexual image to their entire management chain, then reported it using the anonymous tip line. Information technology received the report, concluded the recipients had indeed received sexual content, and, as required, suspended all involved email accounts, including the senior vice presidents. The policy has since been reworded. Story 11. A boss was worried we were stealing time by using the bathroom for too long. He locked all the bathrooms in the building except the ones he could see from his office door, shut off the water to them, put out-of-order signs on them, and sat with a stopwatch timing us from when we walked into the restroom until we walked out. These were single-occupancy restrooms. He would then call out the time. This was over the top and almost certainly illegal, but he never made a formal policy restricting bathroom time. He just wanted to make everyone feel uncomfortable if they took too long. I discovered that because of my height, it was easy to go through the drop ceiling and climb over the half wall. I was the only other person using the men's restroom besides my boss, who was short. I went in, locked the door from the inside, did my business and climbed back out through the ceiling, leaving the door locked so my boss could not get in when he needed to go. He was forced to use the women's restroom, which led to complaints from female employees about how long he was spending in there. To this day, I do not know if he ever figured out how I was doing that. Story 12. The bottom floor of my secondary school was a square with a corridor all the way around. After an incident in which a student was knocked over, they implemented a one-way system. Unfortunately, they were very strict about enforcing it. If you accidentally walked past your class, you could not just turn around. The school seemed very proud of the new rule, until everyone started showing up late for class because they had to do extra laps of the bottom floor. Story 13. I couldn't buy drinks at lunch with cash. I had to buy a voucher. They were cheaply made laminated pieces of paper. This was 2001. I was 13 and bored. I scanned the vouchers, printed about 100 copies on paper that roughly matched the color of the originals, and laminated them myself. They were badly made, not even the right color on the back, and crudely cut out. I tried paying with one and encountered no problems, so I passed them out and made some new friends, which increased demand. It took about 3 weeks for staff to notice, but by then the fake vouchers had been mixed with the real ones and resold to students through the student office. About half of the vouchers sold were fake. Drinks were cash only from then on. For a little while they had to accept the fake vouchers because they had already sold and charged for some of them. Story 14. Some time ago, my school banned the color pink because many students wore it one October and administrators thought it signified gang affiliation. The students had been wearing it for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. The rule backfired. Story 15. In Las Vegas, the fire department had a policy that if a firefighter called out and another covered the shift, the covering firefighter was paid overtime. Eventually, every firefighter at every station traded shifts, so they were always earning overtime. It went unnoticed for over a year. It became a huge scandal, and those in charge who allowed it and effectively cost the city millions were punished severely. According to an article from the Nevada Policy Research Institute, the Clark County Fire Department employed 739 full-time firefighters in 2009. Of that number, 565, or 76.5%, received total wages in excess of $100,000. While the $63,433 in base pay that the average firefighter received might be reasonable, the average firefighter was able to more than double that amount on the final paycheck, receiving pay for longevity, paramedic training, and other allowances, as well as $25,688 in callback and overtime, to collect $129,476 in total pay, including $43,422 in benefits. The average firefighter received a total compensation package of $172,898. Some firefighters took home amounts far greater than the average. 2 firefighters took home wages in excess of $400,000. Several firefighters approached $100,000 in callback and overtime alone. 2 firefighters received more than $90,000 in benefits alone. Each had more than $80,000 deposited by the county into his retirement account. Story 16. To make moving between classes more efficient, they designated up and down stairways. They did not take into account that the stairs were at the ends of very long corridors, which made it impossible to reach the next class on time. As a result, no one bothered to be on time and they blamed the stairway rule. Story 17. My high school had a smoking problem in the bathrooms. To solve it, instead of stationing a teacher outside the restrooms during passing time, they locked all the bathrooms except one. This forced about 1,200 students to wait in a very long line to use 3 stalls for each gender during the 10 minutes between classes. During class time, The assistant principal sat outside the one open bathroom, checked students' identification, and signed each student in and out. Only one student was allowed inside at a time. 1. Major health code violation. 2. Students had to hold their urine all day. 3. Female students who were menstruating often needed the restroom and had to get a pass from class because lines were too long during breaks. 4. Smokers still smoked in the gym locker rooms during changing time. The rule did not solve the smoking problem. It made restroom access very unhygienic and frustrating. Story 18. In the late 1980s, the rule at my high school was no shorts. A classmate arrived for an exam wearing basketball shorts that reached below her knees. The teacher sent her home to change. She returned in a micro miniskirt and took the exam. Story 19. Every shift there is a quota we must fulfill. Even if we meet it early, we must keep working until the 8-hour shift ends. As a result, people rush for 4 hours, take a 3-hour lunch or coffee break, then work slowly for 1 hour. There is no rule allowing us to take necessary breaks when we can still reach the quota. Now we are permitted to stop once the quota is completed. Story 20. In chemistry class, we had plastic bottles of distilled water that could be squeezed to produce a small jet of water. We used to spray one another to make it look like someone had wet their trousers. To counter this, our teacher introduced a punishment for anyone caught spraying or being sprayed. If you could spray someone and get away with it, they would both have wet trousers and have to write excerpts from a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. Needless to say, the punishment for being sprayed was quickly abolished. Story 21. I worked at a restaurant that started hosting Thursday night trivia to attract more customers. The prize was that the winner's bill would be paid. One person asked to have everyone's food charged to his bill and then won. They stopped doing trivia night. Story 22. People who were caught wandering the halls or skipping classes were sent straight home. Story 23. Back in 2011, a company I worked for had the bright idea to block all social networks because employees should work instead of slacking off on Facebook. I could write volumes about the toxic culture there. The owner and president lived in another country and visited about once every few months. He was universally feared, and a few days before his arrival, the whole building went into panic. A few weeks after the social network ban, he showed up, and 5 minutes later, half of the information technology department was rushing to his office. Apparently, there was an issue with the wireless network, or at least that was what he thought since he could not log on to Facebook. It was fixed in seconds. A few years and 3 promotions later, I made a joke about it to him. Instead of laughing, he gave me a confused look. It turned out he still thought it was some internet problem because whoever decided to ban social networks did not have the courage to tell him after the incident. Story 24. I am the one who lives closest to work, so if the building alarm goes off overnight, I am first on the list to get the call from the alarm company. It used to be that if we had good reason to believe the alarm was not an actual break-in, we could tell them not to summon the police and to ignore the alarm. I can access the building cameras from home. The most common cause was the cleaning crew, who were always having trouble disarming the system. After a sister site ignored an alarm that turned out to be a real break-in, the facilities director decided that from then on the alarm company should always summon the police. We were required to go to the building, get the police all clear, and reset the alarm. This was a huge pain but rare enough, and I lived about 2 minutes away. We then contracted for the alarm company to replace all of our panels and sensors. It was a nightmare process that ultimately took months, and the whole time there were phantom alarms, sometimes multiple times a night. Each time I had to go out in the middle of the night, I prepared the required report, sent it to the facilities director, and requested that we return to the previous process. Each time he refused, saying we could not afford to miss a potential real break-in. After about 3 weeks of this nonsense, I was due for some time off and planned to go out of town. The protocol required me to ignore calls from the alarm company so they would move to the next person on the list, which happened to be the facilities director. During the 5 days I was off, I ignored at least 4 overnight calls that would have gone to him. Then suddenly, nothing. When I returned, I was informed that for the duration of the alarm update we would not arm the building at all. So much for the claim that we could not afford to risk a break-in. Story 25. At my old school, you could be suspended for minor infractions, including smoking. If you witnessed others smoking, you could be suspended along with them. As a result, everyone worked together to hide the smokers at all costs, because otherwise nearly everyone would be suspended. Story 26. Management required every employee to use electronic time clocks to punch in and out for work, including lunch. Punching in late or leaving early would cause pay to be docked and result in a disciplinary letter. Multiple people wanted to sabotage the clocks by cutting the cords and so on, but wiser heads prevailed. Everyone arrived several minutes early and left late every single day to avoid getting into trouble. Unfortunately, this created unimpeachable evidence of hours worked, and the employer had to pay out thousands of dollars in overtime the first month. The clocks disappeared exactly 5 weeks after they were installed, with no notification. Story 27. I worked at a language teaching center where the lessons were pre-planned by the curriculum. On weekdays, we often only had 2 to 3 hours of classes sporadically spread through the afternoon and evening. Management were pretty chill when I started, and people planned their lessons in bulk, which entailed checking the schedule and printing out the required unit or session worksheets, then showing up 10 minutes before to deliver the lesson. On weekends, we'd have full 10-hour workdays. Apart from that, we'd have the occasional training session or faculty meeting, but otherwise you could go home or do whatever you wanted between lessons. All the provided apartments were within 10 minutes walking distance of the center, so this was ideal. The nice managers left, and the new management were assholes who started scheduling mandatory office hours where we had to be in the center with absolutely nothing to do. There would be a noon staff meeting and my next lesson would be from 4 to 6 p.m., with 3.5 useless office hours in the middle. When we asked them what we should do, they said, "Think about your teaching methods." Basically posturing. A bunch of the other teachers started watching movies on the projectors in the spare classrooms. I brought in my Nintendo Switch. Some people would just nap on the beanbags in the reading nook. There was no busy work they could generate, and soon it was apparent to everyone, especially prospective new students and parents, how unprofessional and awful it made the center look. The managers embarrassingly just stopped scheduling and enforcing those office hours. Story 28. I went to a strict Catholic school with uniforms. Students in 4th through 8th grade had to wear belts until a new principal made belts mandatory for the entire school. After many bathroom accidents involving kindergartners, first graders, and second graders, and complaints from parents, the principal rescinded the dress code change. More recently, that principal was fired for embezzling money from the school. Story 29. Back in 2014, our Human Resources Department made a rule that people could not go to other buildings. We had 3 buildings within a block of each other. All 3 had shipping areas, and the warehouse employees had to go to each building to work. We were told to stay in one building. I asked, "We ship out of all 3. Who is going to do the work?" A manager said, "Oh, it will be taken care of." The next day, a shipment worth $500,000 did not go out. The following day, we had a meeting. They asked, "Why did you not ship this?" We replied, 2 days ago we were told to stay in our building and that someone would take care of it." The rule was quickly changed. Story 30. The grocery store I work at is now required to charge 5 cents for plastic bags. Because of this, many customers request paper bags. Since our paper bags are terrible, we usually double bag them so they do not rip. One day the store manager saw a cashier double bagging paper bags and yelled at them because paper bags are more expensive and the store cannot afford to double bag them. A new rule was made. You may not double bag paper bags unless the items are very heavy. A couple of weeks later, my bagger was using single paper bags. As the store manager walked by, the bagger picked up one of the bags that was not that heavy and it ripped open in front of the manager. We are allowed to double bag them now. Story 31. I would say zero tolerance. Previously, children would get into fights and one or both would be suspended. Today, children are being sent to the hospital because there is no incentive to go easy when you can beat a child severely and receive the same consequences. Story 32. Students used to smoke in the toilets, so the headmaster locked all the male toilets except one with 5 stalls. My school had about 700 students, of whom about 300 were male. Everyone realized it became impossible to use the toilet quickly. As a result, some boys entered the remaining toilet and urinated and defecated in all the trash cans. No one was identified, and the other toilets were reopened immediately. This happened in Eastern Europe. Story 33. Telework was deemed unattainable for most federal jobs, much to employees' dismay. Then coronavirus disease 2019 hit, and now telework is common. Good luck to the federal government if it tries to revert to a ban on telework. Story 34. Zero tolerance ended shortly after a bully was thrown through a window because the students said that if they were going to be suspended for defending themselves, they would make it worth their while. Story 35. Not really a rule but a change in policy. I worked for a major beer distributor as a delivery driver. They began using less glue in packaging to save money, on the order of a few cents per package. As a result, breakage during distribution increased drastically, causing the company to absorb significantly more damaged product. The losses were large enough that they quickly reversed the decision. For the record, the company was Anheuser-Busch. This appears to be a common trial period for many beverage distributors. Story 36. This one is great. We had a no dating at work policy, but the director began a relationship and others had hidden relationships as well. The policy was nullified when the director announced his engagement, and about 6 other couples came forward. We no longer have that policy. However, employees must inform the administrator of any workplace relationships. Story 37. When the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic started, our boss insisted that our entire team sit in on group Zoom calls, even if the agenda topics had nothing to do with their roles. She thought it would build team unity. Productivity dropped, negative Google reviews increased, and staff became more stressed. When she demanded answers on the next Zoom call, one of my coworkers bluntly said, "Well, I would reply to this woman's voicemail, but I'm stuck on this Zoom call." Story 38. Our boss complained that welders and millwrights took lunch and breaks whenever we wanted and implemented a rule that if you did not take your break or lunch at the scheduled time, you would not get them. Another welder and I were sent to perform a repair about a 2-hour drive from the shop first thing in the morning. The boss said it would be a quick fix, so we did not bring our lunches. We needed the machine running as soon as possible because downtime was costing $250,000 per hour. It turned out the quick fix was actually a major welding job that required us to completely rebuild a motor mount. The operator had told the boss this needed to be done. Had the boss allowed us to take lunches and breaks when needed, or at least told us the actual scope, we would not have driven 2 hours to the job, worked for 1 hour, driven back 2 hours to the shop, eaten lunch at noon as scheduled, and then driven 2 hours back to finish the repair. Summary. My boss's power trip cost the company over $1 million in a single day, all to enforce lunch times. Story 39. The private school where I used to work hired a second deputy head, whose main function seemed to be creating rules and policies without stopping to consider whether they were really needed. Their piece de resistance was to give all the students little laminated cards advising them that if they were being harassed, this person always pronounced the word as harassed, and they were supposed to tell their tormentor that they had had enough and wanted them to stop doing or saying that. The students, all in their mid to late teens, reacted predictably. Most of the cards were soon spotted floating in the river that ran through the village where the school was located, and the phrase was used frequently by students in response to whichever member of staff asked them to comb their hair, make their bed, settle down, or get on with their work. I remember asking one of the school's star rugby players whether the phrase had ever been used as intended. He replied that it had, but he kicked the guy in the balls while he said it. Story 40. They stopped paying for extra hours because management said the only reason overtime was needed was poor organization. At first, employees stopped working late. Some tasks were impossible to complete during regular working hours. They ended up paying employees for 4 consecutive Saturdays at 150% of their pay to twice as many employees just to get back on schedule. Story 41. No more swipe cards to enter the building. From then on, we used fingerprint sensors. That was 2 weeks before the coronavirus disease 2019 outbreak. Story 42. I worked in a gym. The Smith machine, a large squat rack, was not bolted to the floor and rocked back and forth. When I came on shift, I saw the problem, marked it out of order, called the company to fix it, and left a note for the boss. The boss removed the out-of-order sign, and each time I came on shift, the machine was back in use. A member hurt his back on it and sued. A solicitor visited, and I showed him where we leave maintenance notes for management. They settled with the member. It was idiotic. Story 43. My Catholic school told us to leave space for angels when dancing at middle school dances. The theology teacher then told us that angels have no physical form. Cue lots of kids gleefully defending their attempts at dirty dancing. Story 44. A new information technology contractor implemented monthly password changes and strict password rules that disallowed recognizable words and required multiple numbers and symbols. When the chief executive officer stopped by our branch, his first question was why everyone had a sticky note on their monitor with their current password. Story 45. In my high school, if you were late for a class, they would not let you in the door. You were sent to the tardy center to get a tardy pass. If you accumulated enough passes, you were assigned detention or Saturday school. The time when you went to collect the pass was also when attendance was taken. Not being in class, you would be marked absent. Attendance was recorded on Scantron cards clipped outside the classroom and picked up early in the period by a member of student government who took them to the office for processing. The office reconciled those records with the tardy center, and if you had checked in, your attendance was counted. So if you were late to class, you might as well not bother going. Story 46. No more backpacks. Teachers were angry when students did not have supplies. What were we supposed to do? Stuff everything into our shirts or pants? As a girl, that was a problem. I remember getting in trouble for carrying my purse when the rule initially took effect. They eventually relaxed it so we could carry small bags. Story 47. A control freak boss says, all rescheduling of a lesson with a client should be run through a secretary, who will update the room reservation and keep me informed. The implicit threat was, if you let clients reschedule too easily, you are a worthless wimp that I do not want to work with. Old version. The client contacts you directly, you work it out together quickly, and you inform the secretary of the new date and time so she can change the room reservation. Done. New version. The secretary receives a change request from the client but does not know your availability. She contacts you and gets your availability. She sends it to the client when she has time because it is a low priority for her. The client eventually picks a date and sends it back to the secretary, who sends it to you. You send confirmation. Calendars often change in the meantime due to new circumstances, so there is back and forth a few times before a final date and time is chosen. The secretary then reserves the room. This chews up so much time that the secretary falls behind on other work, slowing the process and increasing the chance of another calendar change requiring another run-through. The new system lasted about 4 days. Then an overloaded secretary went on stress-related medical leave. The workload was shared among the other secretaries. 3 days later, another secretary went on stress-related sick leave. When the boss tried to reassign the workload again, he got an immediate, "What the heck is wrong with you?" And the next to last secretary stormed out in tears and went on stress-related sick leave. The new system died there and then. As the French say, when you chase away the easy way, it will come galloping back. Note: this took place in France, where since 2005 employers have been legally obliged to actively reduce sources of stress, and doctors' notes are relatively easy to obtain. Employers cannot easily question them nor force the employee back to work. They cannot even telephone them. Story 48. You cannot speak a foreign language at work unless you are a certified translator in that language. We had a customer service representative who spoke Spanish as a second language. His regular Spanish-speaking customers were confused when he could no longer speak to them in Spanish because they knew he was fluent. Eventually, a manager explained to them in English that the company had prohibited him from speaking Spanish. They were not happy. Story 49. When I was in elementary school, we had a stoplight in the cafeteria. It was green when we were at the correct volume, yellow when we were getting too loud, and red if we were way too loud. If it turned red, we lost our after-lunch recess. Whenever it turned red and we knew our recess was gone, we would all count down and then yell to see how many times we could make it turn red. Story 50. This house runs from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. If you are not home by 11 p.m., the door will be locked and you will have to sleep outside. The door will be unlocked at 7 a.m. Cut to, where have you been? Why did you not come home last night? The rule quickly changed from, don't come home after curfew, to please come home. Story 51. At my school, the only consequence for anything was detention. If you did not go to detention, the consequence was detention again. Story 52. My mother was an elementary school teacher. 4 years, the teacher's be quiet signal was holding up one hand in a peace sign. The principal decided that this did not have enough meaning and invented her own. At a staff meeting, she explained that her new sign stood for ears listening, eyes looking, lips locked. She then made the letter L with her index finger and thumb and held it in front of her forehead. This principal did not take criticism well, so none of the staff were willing to tell her that she was making the loser sign. The new sign was taught to the children. Most of them made fun of it. Some of the more sensitive children became upset. Within a few weeks, they went back to the peace sign. Story 53. People were wasting time and hanging out in the bathroom during class. The solution was to unlock bathrooms only between classes for a luxurious 4 minutes. By the time the door was unlocked and the line formed, 10 to 15 extra minutes of class time were lost. They had to allow students to use the restroom during class again. Edited to add, it seems my school was not the only one. I suspect this is an American practice. Story 54. I remember my brother wearing a skirt to school for a while when the dress code changed and boys were no longer allowed to wear shorts. Story 55. Boys at my school started a fight club. They picked times to meet in the bathrooms, usually during class, and wrestled on the floor. After a while, they returned to class. Teachers assumed the long time spent in the bathrooms was just boys being boys, but they grew suspicious when students kept coming back covered in water and urine. Some of them began urinating on the floor to make being knocked down worse. Teachers then instituted a rule that only 2 to 3 boys could be in the bathroom at a time, and a security guard was posted outside. The boys created a team roster, and the 2 to 3 who were sent in at a time would wrestle and move up the chart if they won. Teachers never found out. Story 56. If you wear socks that are not black, you get sent home to change them and they mark you as present. Laughing out loud. Most people started wearing different colored socks just to go home and relax. I actually miss high school. Story 57. My company decided to save money by eliminating our staff messenger, a kind older man who drove to each of our 5 local offices daily to pick up and drop off mail. In the afternoon, he sorted outgoing and interoffice mail for delivery the next day. They told us to send any interoffice mail overnight by United Parcel Service. This could mean sending out 4 different shipments, 1 to each office. After the first month, the United Parcel Service bill was 5 times the man's monthly salary. They abandoned the plan and rehired him. Story 58. This was before I was hired, but still epic. In a medical setting where scrubs were standard attire, the previous manager instituted a policy banning leisure shoes and requiring pantyhose and makeup for nurses and therapists, and mandating sport coats and ties for doctors, but she failed to distinguish between genders. On day 1, all of the nurses and therapists, roughly 40% of whom were male, showed up in full face makeup and dressy shoes, including a couple of brave men who wore low heels. All of the doctors, with an even gender split, showed up in sport coats and ties. The policy was immediately rescinded, and that manager resigned not long after. Story 59. In middle school, my school district decided to switch to a system with identification cards. They were basically cheap lanyards with an identification badge. The whole point of the identification cards was to control entry and exit from the school, prevent school shootings, and pay for lunches. Our district did not have enough money at the time to buy the scanners because they did not realize how expensive the identification badges themselves would be. We ended up being issued identification badges that had no use, and we were required to wear them. After a while, this got old, and students started having badge fights at recess. Being slapped by an identification badge is more painful than you might think. The last straw was when almost everyone began hanging them in one tree in the courtyard. and eventually students started posting pictures of their identification badges on Instagram and Snapchat. The principal loved that. Story 60. Halfway through the school year, the school banned book bags from classrooms for school safety reasons. This caused students to arrive late to class regularly, as many classes required us to bring school-assigned textbooks every day along with supplies, binders, and other materials. That year, the school recorded high tardiness and low attendance because many students chose to skip class rather than arrive late. This was during my senior year. As far as I know, they still do not allow book bags in classrooms, defeating the whole purpose of a book bag. Story 61. At a Christian school, there was always a morning prayer before classes started. Our principal decided that people who did not arrive on time at 8 o'clock in the morning for the prayer would stay outside for the first period. The plan backfired from the first day because nearly everyone arrived late and there were very few students. Story 62. In my high school, administrators worried about gang activity, so they banned wearing solid red or blue shirts. However, only black male students were disciplined for it. In protest, all black male students wore black shirts while everyone else wore red or blue. After some white students were asked whether they were in gangs, administrators realized the rule was unfair and rescinded it. Story 63. My daughter's high school has a one-way movement policy. All student traffic walks one way around the entire school. If she leaves one classroom and her next classroom is literally one door back, she cannot walk the 5 meters to that door. She must walk around the entire school, including up and down 3 flights of stairs, for every lesson. Students are then disciplined if they are late. Imagine how high the anxiety was on the first day when none of them knew where to go for any class. Imagine if they went all the way around the school and missed the door by mistake. They would have to start the process again. Story 64. I am a teacher, and we were told not to have our cell phones out during the workday. We were all sent an email in the morning explaining that during the afternoon lockdown drill, we would need to send a text to the administration with the names of any absent or missing students, and the names of everyone who was in our classrooms at the time. No one knew this, so no teachers sent any information to the administration. The administration walked the halls and banged on doors to get teachers to open up, even though our lockdown rules state to stay put. This continued for nearly 30 minutes before an announcement ended the lockdown. We were required to stay after work for 20 minutes to discuss what went wrong, and were told that teachers may use their phones for work purposes only. Story 65. During high school, they introduced a rule halfway through term to improve behavior and reduce the number of students in detention. You could not sit with your friends at lunch in the canteen and had to sit with your homeroom class. If you were caught sitting with friends, you would be given after-school detention. The backfired. Initially, most people followed the rule, but after 2 to 3 weeks, everyone got fed up and more students began sitting with their friends in the canteen. Within just over a month, no one followed the rule and the school ended up with more than twice as many students in detention. If you threaten an entire school with detention and no one complies, you will eventually have too many students in detention. They scrapped the rule after 6 weeks. Story 66. There was a very strict no visible bra strap rule at my school, even if you were wearing a tank top with thick straps or a strap accidentally slipped to the side. Being the smartass I was, I simply removed my bra whenever I was reprimanded, laughing my ass off. Story 67. My old job was very stressful, but the manager was an arsewipe. After a while, he noticed people would go in the freezer because they were having stress-induced breakdowns. He put a sign on the freezer door saying, "No breakdowns in the freezer." The joke was on him. We started doing it in front of customers to make him look bad. Story 68. In my high school in the late 1980s and early 1990s, shorts were banned and female students were not allowed to wear tank tops. The student body made an agreement. We would all wear skirts and tank tops until the rules changed to either no one may wear tank tops or everyone may wear tank tops, and until skirts and shorts were allowed as long as they were no shorter than 2 inches above the knee. Boys shaved their legs and girls grew out their underarm hair. After 2 weeks, the principal agreed to change the dress code because parents were upset. Not about the clothing, but because their teenage sons were shaving their legs and their daughters had underarm hair. Story 69. I worked as a carpet cleaner. We were not allowed to clean anything that already had moisture. We had moisture meters that were extremely sensitive. They would register moisture from steam on a pizza box or from touching with a hand. If we did not want to do a job, we would test the living hell out of the carpet. Sometimes the meter would go off and we could leave and do something else. I heard stories of guys faking readings by touching the probes with their fingers as they poked the carpets to trigger them. I never did that, but I completely understand the desire. Story 70. Working at Home Depot, I asked for a long weekend off but was denied. Later, after an argument with a supervisor, I received a 3-day suspension that covered that weekend. Success. Story 71. No cell phones while on duty. Violation results in instant dismissal. Now I frequently use my personal phone for work and receive calls throughout the day from my supervisors. They tried to fight the age of technology. Story 72. I work for a furniture store. They recently announced that everyone had to download a super invasive app and that it was completely required. When they realized nobody was doing it, they said that was fine, but no cell phones are allowed in the delivery vehicles. It is working great. If we cannot find an address, the delivery goes back, we are out, and we just leave. They cannot call us to ask where we are because we do not have phones. If they send us on a long trip to a store, we have no idea where it is. They refuse to get us a global positioning system and send us out to the middle of nowhere. Story 73. One of the teams at my workplace develops apps for Apple's iOS operating system, so they needed Mac computers. Their manager insisted the company buy Mac desktop computers instead of MacBook laptops so the team could not take them home. Then 2020 arrived, and they had to take the desktop computers home. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.